Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANS processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Welcome to the Cash American Knowledge Team meeting of 2025. This is a continuation to try and help the knowledge seekers find different ways and means of answering the questions that a lot of people have. And let's see what we can come up with here. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. We are in the basic GANS tech discussion. Today's topic is the epitome. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada, and it is September the 28th of 2025. And this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So as we've been trying to condense all the information so that the mature knowledge seekers can condense that information into something a little bit more bite-sized, and then new knowledge seekers don't get overwhelmed by the avalanche of information. Well, the good news is we have artificial intelligence, which is going to assist us in that regard. But in the meantime, it's nice to know that there's been an awful lot of work going on in the background. And so we're trying to keep everybody posted on relevant current events. And of course, it's fairly obvious that our knowledge has been increasing. We started with the basic books from Aaron Tevakoli Keshe, number one, the Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And of course, it seemed to be very appropriate because it brought together the matter, the dark matter, and the antimatter. And that's something that a lot of people have heard reference to. But in book number two, we talked about the structure of light, and that was something very novel at the time. But what the thing is defining is that we are going from one matter to another matter, and there is a direction of flow, and there's a connection. And so we're wondering how that happens and what is the significance of that. And until we get into book number three and we see the origin of the universe, the confusion really sets in, because now we start to see that from the one matter state, we could create the two matter states. And so one of those, of course, is our favorite, and we call it man's universe. And then there's a sister universe, which we are kind of oblivious to. And the fact of the matter is, it's a lot bigger than our universe. And even our universe is massive. And we are quite happy with that little tiny speck that we call Earth. And speaking of Earth, for 397 weeks, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council have been bringing together the concept of one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And there is a reason for that, is because we're talking about the Universal Council. And so that's beyond the Earth Council. That's beyond the Solar System Council. It involves other races. And the key component here is to understand what is the difference. And the difference really is that we, as Earth species, need commandments. We were told that when we started. We were given 10 commandments. And, we kind of reveled in breaking them all. But the idea is that someone issued these commandments, and of course, it was important for us to adhere to them. And then we have the missing commandments, another 14 of them. And number 11 is thou shalt not lie. And I keep harping on that one because fundamentally it is the foundation of all the other breakages of the commandments. Because if you're lying, then you're covering up that lie, and there has to be a reason for the lie. And then, of course, uh, many of those reasons revolve around cheating, stealing, and killing. All of that involves a certain kind of abuse. And that's because we have promoted the earthbound rule where the higher strength eats the weaker strength, compared to the plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. Either way, it's a conflict point, and whether or not we accept it or whether or not we understand it. But realistically, it's a binding point because at that point it becomes a manifestation. And in terms of physicality, that's a density manifestation. So all of these fields, when they come together in the binding zone, is an inertia field. And so our existence is an inertia density manifestation in reality. And this binding is very, very important because it's self-serving. And no one is deserving of being self-serving more than you. And that becomes your dimension point. But with the reason we have those commandments is so that we don't do this at the expense of others, which of course that has been a flaming failure, as we have a whole history of wars and a whole attitude in our society of lying, cheating, stealing, and all the other good things that make us into falling angels. And that's easy to understand because when we do a terracing of ponds, we see that the water will flow from a higher to a lower, and that connection is by gravity. And so that falling is actually a gradient. But in in science, we call it angular density, and that's kind of falling where you have increased density, increased pressure, increased gravity. And then, of course, overall, that becomes an increased dependence on Earth space feeding. And so we are all categorized as fallen angels because of this. And there's an internal popcorn pressure of GANS tensity, which we've been referring to in this GANS tech because we are bags of GANS. And there's an enormous amount of energy within our physicality. But since angular momentum is conserved, we don't see the other offsetting balance that is allowing us to exist. Well, today's topic is rather different because it involves definitions, and one of those definitions is epitome. An epitome is a person or a thing that is a perfect example of a particular quality or type. So perfect seems to be the key word here. The epitome of meaning is not a standard phrase, but epitome itself means a perfect or typical example or a summary of something. Therefore, epitome of meaning would suggest being the perfect or most representative example of a particular meaning or idea. Well, how do we get so close to perfection when we are all sinners? And so when you look at the root word of epitome, it's is Greek meaning short, to cut short. as in a summary or miniature form, or an instance that represents a larger reality. But it's also used as a synonym for embodiment. And so I want you to keep that in mind, because what we're going to talk about is the epitome of love, because this refers to a perfect example or embodiment of love, representing the highest, the most ideal form of it. This ideal love is often characterized by deep affection, selfless care, and often involves sacrifice or an ultimate expression of devotion, as seen in various interpretations across different cultures and religions, from the unconditional love of God to the self-sacrificing love of a parent. So this term sacrifice has to be placed in context. And that is to say, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. It isn't where the higher strength gets consumed by the weaker strength. And obviously, this affects loosh. And many of us are practicing loosh harvesting. And that is a single-minded intention. And it extends to a hive mind intention, which reflects in our GANS intention. And so everyone wants honey, and your honey tastes better than my honey. So I'm always trying to steal it. And this is where the problem lies in our society. So the changes that we are trying to initiate are actually ways and means to cross the memory threshold. And we're at that tipping point. And there's a difference in what we call long-term memory, because the freedom to connect to this is the freedom that connects you to the memory. So when we talk about long-term, lifelong memory, that's the memory, the long-term memory that you have from the time that you're born to the present. But there's a historical memory, and not just the kind of historical teachings that you would get out of a textbook, but there's an ancestral memory, and that is ingrained within our RNA. And this ancestral memory follows a universal memory, which of course includes the universe. And so this is kind of the game plan that we have, but we're working from a point of efficiency. So the GANS tech is there to give us that vitality enhancement which we need to facilitate the uplifting of our emotional and physical construct. And this is a novel concept, because we are indoctrinated to believe that we eventually become old and decrepit. And so there's a huge flaw now in our society, because we see people who are young and decrepit. So vitality enhancement has nothing to do with age. It has to do with energy. Energy, how it comes from the transmutation highway and then filters down to the transmission highway. And then we have the transition highway that is in between. And so they operate on different energy states, but they have a common ground, and that is the carbon connection. And so in the physicality, we have the carbon-12, and then we have various isotopes, carbon-14, carbon-10, and even higher energies, carbon-8 and carbon-16. So we've talked about these relationships for quite a while, because we've utilized them when we made the cups of life. So each of us as knowledge seekers have been able to take advantage of the nanocoding process of the monatomic science to create GANSs that are have an affinity for the emotion and affinity for the physicality. And so we have had an opportunity to compare the difference. But the thing is, there's still cups of life, as the physicality and the emotional construct affect the life. So, but in no way were they the cups of the pandemic, even though they served a very useful purpose, because they facilitated this GANS radiance manifestation, which enhanced our vitality for the emotional and physical constructs. But it also taught us how to make carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, and copper GANSes, water and amino acid GANSes. And now we're in the stage where we're discussing gold GANSes and the various other GANSes, all represented by the periodic table of elements. But the most important GANS is the relationship between the emotional cup and physical cup, and then, of course, the soul cup. And those three together create this magnetical gravitational field with the soul. But that is in some place. And in our case, Earth is that place. And so it too has a cup of life. And the connection between the Earth cup and the soul cup is another inertia cup. And that is our existence. This is where we have the connection between the environment and between our radiance. So how does that get connected in practical terms? Well, when we look at the cup of the universe, it is basically the epitome of our brain function, where we have a left and right hemisphere, and they work together similarly, like the copper and zinc GANs, which is the physical GANs and the emotional GANs. But there's a connection to the universe, the carbogen GANs. And so we take these three together, and that gives us the basics. And what does that give us in total? Well, it only gives us the brain. And of course, that brain needs to operate in an environment of Earth space. So we have more than three. We have a physicality as well. And in the process of achieving that physicality, which is the slowing down into the energy state of physicality, we don't neglect the origin of the cup of the universe. So we still have the one and the other one and the other one, but it's now more than three. So there is nothing sacrificed here in that whole process. So what it is understanding the matter plasma dimension, where the physicality you can touch and see, but the plasma you can't touch and see. However, there is a matter plasma that has a nearness and proximity to the physical plasma, and we saw that in our auras. And so either way, whether it's in that physical or plasmatic matter plasma dimension, this is our reference point. And so our view point of the universe is from a feedback dominant point. And the view of the universe, of course, is from a feeding point. And then this is where we run into a problem. And so the beginning of the understanding of this problem is to take that foundation, which was the copper wire, and then nanocoating that. And we found that that nanocoating of the copper was actually a carbon nanocrystal, and that it had to be aligned so that we could create a gradient between the magnetical and gravitational points. And then that becomes the gravitational inertia point that can exchange energy due to its nano alignment, and there has to be a direction of flow. And so that flow follows the conservation of inertia, which is the magra of energy transfer states. And so we've talked about the atomic state and the nano state and the GAN state, and how the one side balances off to the other side. And it isn't just on the one energy state. It can transition from one energy state to another energy state. And so how we rotate around that equal sign, we call the various turning points. And there are these transitions and that are facilitated by the pico nature of the energy state. So we're talking about another 3 orders of magnitude beyond the nanocoating. So here we are establishing the basis that we go from this pico coating, which is like a pico popcorn, and we can see its structure. It has many, many points, and yet it's extremely tiny. And then we get into the GANS coating, which is like a GANS popcorn, and it is a lot bigger than what you see in this picture, because all of us have made the GANS and it's clearly visible. You don't need a microscope to see it. And so that understanding of its structure tells you that there's a negative charge, which is magnetical, and a positive charge, which is gravitational. So as these field forces are balanced out, what you have is gas in the center, and it creates like a miniature GANS explosion. So this GANS is massive, but in its massiveness, it carries an enormous number of magnetical points. And so collectively, it becomes much stronger at an order of magnitude, many orders of magnitude, in fact. And so there's always this molecular communication link that we understand in science. It's a covalent bond between two masses. But the fact of the matter is, it's a magnetical gravitational bond. So in order for a mass to exist, it has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship. In order for the mass to have a relationship with another mass, it has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship. And then who decides which way is that relationship? So to balance that off, there has to be an equal and opposite magnetical gravitational relationship. And so that's fine for the understanding of the construct of the molecular structure. However, it is more than just a head chasing the tail, because the energy that is contained within one is not the only energy that exists. And so there is no reference to which energy, and there is no way to define that, except that there are factors which, shall we say, differentiate which energies will be exchanged. And this is perfectly normal. It's just like when you're going home. You're going to go home to a specific home. And it's very important that you do that for many reasons, some of them more obvious than others. But the difference is in the atomic chain, it is very physical, whereas in the polyatomic chain, it is more plasmatic. And so this is a characteristic that we find in the hydrogen, because hydrogen in itself has this connection, but it's a unique connection where by changing the polarity relationship between two hydrogens, it becomes either an orthohydrogen or a parahydrogen. And this becomes very important to understand, because the hydrogen is fundamental. And it comes from the source. And in that coming from the source, it has to manifest in some kind of stable matter. And so we find that the connection to the basic field is in carbon-14, so not hydrogen, and the connection to the universe in the carbon-60, again, not hydrogen. But there are other fields beyond that, and they are beyond our current understanding and our current ability to enjoy that, except for one small detail. The limitation, of course, has been time. And we are in the process of not only transmuting, but also transcending time and our understanding of the time, because time is a reflection of the energy in motion. And so we see that as we've encountered these various polyatomic GANSs, and the fundamental ones, of course, we'll keep mentioning carbon dioxide, zinc oxide, and copper oxide. The point of the matter is that oxygen is the gravitational component here that is anchoring all of the GANSs. But each of these GANSs are displaying different characteristics. And so that becomes the skill set that we have to understand. So how we manipulate our ganses through these skill sets is defined as susceptibility, because in the universe, nothing is nothing. Something is something. And something is always something as opposed to being something else. So these are the things that we have to develop the skill sets to be able to find the practical applications. And we already know that there's something going on because we had the water, we had the GANS, and then we had the rotating fields, and then we had a hole in the GANS. And then we find is if there's a soul in that hole. And so that becomes the resonance point, which is working from the magnetical gravitational limitations of that field. So when we're looking at the soul sitting in the middle of this field, it has a charge, and that charge can be emitted through polar energy. It becomes the emission pole, the North Pole being the magnetical negative giver, and the South Pole being the gravitational absorption taker. However, in order to go from the North Pole to the South Pole, we follow a different path that goes around the sphere. And that sphere has a rotating field, which can change based on its speed, on its strength, and even its direction. And so all of this is determined by the charge. So the charge is always positive, that we know, but it's the direction of flow that affects the charge in question. And so as it's emitted, it's magnetical, and as it's absorbed, is gravitational. So along the path, it has to go through various changes in direction. And there are other factors that can affect it, which is why when we look at the Earth ganses, there are so many different ganses. In fact, there's a GANS for every element in the periodic table of elements. And so we find that each of these is defined in its own specific terms. So this is the basis of what we demonstrated in Beijing on May the 10th, and we discovered how to create gold. And so men have been gold diggers for a long time, and they're not the only gold diggers, but we don't have to dig it anymore. We can manufacture it, and in large volumes, because we understand the star core components. So there's a magnetical and gravitational relationship, and there's a gradient charge. So that is variable. And it has to have a relationship to something else. And the difference between the two is the gradient charge, where one star core gradient could be magnetical and the other one would be gravitational. And the difference between two would be the gradient. And then, of course, in order to make a connection, there has to be 2 points of view coming together. So there's the giving of the taking and the taking and the giving. And that relationship is coming from both directions at the same time. Now, to capture this energy, we develop a GANS inertia point at the core, which makes the star formation more gravitational. And that changes the gravitational gradient charge. So that is why we call it the falling binding point, because it's a gravitational binding point. But it's an arbitrary point of view. It's connected to something. And all of these connections are loose ends, and they seem to be terminal because they give us the magnetical gravitational relationship, but they're not. They extend everywhere, continually. and they're continually interacting. And this is what we have to understand. So to create that core point, that core inertia point, it has to be a manifestation. That manifestation does not have to be in physicality. It can remain in a plasma reality. But the point is that it is susceptible to increase or decrease the gradient charge. And the one inertia field would be magnetical and the other one would be gravitational, and the combination of the two would be that gravitational inertia point. And this is fundamental to the creation of matter. And then we have to introduce the concept of duality, because this now applies to 2 points. And these 2 points are going to work together like a partnership. So we call this the twinity. And if we understand the twinity, then we understand how ray motion is part of creation. It in of itself has a twinity, which is to say that it follows the laws of conservation, where we have, on the one hand, which we, from our point of view, we see the natural creation balanced by the natural decay, but we have to understand that there's an opposite point of view, which is also balanced by the natural creation and the natural decay. And so there is a link, there's a bond. And although we can't see it, we have to know that it's there, because otherwise it wouldn't exist, because one side is magnetical, one side is gravitational. And the reason the two exist together is because there is this boundary. And so as poor observers, we have to fudge things. And of course, it's not really a lie, is it? It's just like a white lie, perhaps. But now we're coming to the necessity of being a little bit more specific, because in the concept of the twinity, that applies to the nanotech, and it applies to the picotech, which is now even 3 orders of magnitude more intense. And then when we start to incorporate that into the star tech, that develops a whole different energy state. So we've been discussing the twinity of the nanotech, and now the discussion of the twinity of the GANS tech. And we see that it is affecting many polyatomic inertia gradients, because not only does it have to link up to its own gravitational point, but it has to take into account others. And we didn't say which others, we didn't say how many others. The fact is that there are multiple turning points that we can relate to. And each one in its position has a horizontal transmission and a vertical transition, which creates this dynamic plasma relationship. That is that point within and that point without, that represents the field going around. So the point within being gravitational and the point going around being magnetical. But in the process of the emission, what we call the vertical emission, which is the feeding radiance, it is a magnetical plasma. But there's a feedback radiance, which is the gravitational aspect of the magnetical plasma. So how does the magnetical plasma become magnetical, and then the magnetical plasma becomes gravitational? So we see that there's a polyatomic gradient transitioning. And so the field path is constantly going through this pole flipping. And then the emission and the absorption pole also go through this pole flipping, because there's a gravitational core. And so that is always existing. So when we're talking about the creation of free plasma, we see the fundamental building blocks for our life is carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. And this is fundamental for the creation of life. And so we talk about the GANS creation in the core, and we talk about the GANS creation in the star core. And so we have structure within structures. And so when we have that connection, knowing that connection is gravitational. So the points that are being connected are automatically magnetical. So we've gone from a very simple to a very complex perspective here, but the rules are the same, point to point and a connection. And we just keep going. And where is that totally missing connection? It's part of the cosmic ray feeding, right? And that cosmic ray feeding comes from the vacuum of outer space. Where's that balance? That balance is in the plasma core vacuum. And so everything follows in between the two and can exist as long as it has a magnetical plasma relationship with another magnetical plasma. So the direction of flow, of course, is going to be from the higher strength to the weaker strength. But it's a two-way street. So that two-way street is going to be going in opposite directions, but it will also be representing a gradient so that we know that there will be an emission and there will be an absorption. And so that is like forever. So when we're looking at the inertia highways of the carbon and its connection, we have to understand that there is this unseen background. And that background, of course, has its unseen background. So we are actually having many opportunities to have many multiple turning points. So how do we become specific? And as we saw in the 603rd Knowledge Seekers Workshop, we have a soul and we have a body, and there is a vertical alignment, the same way that we've seen with the vertical emission, but it doesn't follow a straight line. It's fairly entangled because there is a sequence of following a path and a link. And so the intermediary, of course, is the soul of physicality. But fundamentally, there's the soul side and there's the physical side. So the soul of physicality becomes that connection. And so it resembles an infinity loop. Well, how does it get out of that infinity loop to match the vertical alignment? So there's another inertia field emission, and that allows the inertia threshold crossing. So we can still maintain that foundation of energy containment, but we're able to engage with other containments. And there is no limit to what we can engage with. It all is dependent on susceptibility and the susceptibility gradient. So in summary, when we look at a chain link, there's a physicality which is atomic, and the soul of physicality is monatomic. The soul itself is diatomic, and humanity is polyatomic. And so that's the difference between the chain link and the path link. So we have polyatomic gradient transitioning, and this is going on all the time, whether you're sitting in a chair contemplating your navel or you're out and about running around. So the susceptibility gradient is always at play here. It is always changing because of this NP junction. The negative junction, which is a combination of the X, Y, and Z axis, and the positive junction, which is a combination of another X, Y, and Z axis. And the two together have this magnetical gravitational relationship where one side becomes negative and one side becomes positive based on its relationship. And that then becomes a transfer state negative positive junction. And that is the emission. That is the magnetical emission, which represents your attention, where you have unity with the community, and you also have the unity within your inner space. You cannot extricate yourself from the universe. So we have this mental and physical bonding, and the soul and consciousness bonding, and energy and intention bonding. And so these are all bonds that are not physical, but they're there nevertheless. And they are all based on the gradient charge. So when we look at this progression and review, we have a nanopoint which moves towards density. And then we have this pico point, which becomes highly gravitational. But then we look at the GANS point, which is obviously very gaseous. It's going in the opposite direction, and the plasma point, which is highly magnetical. So we have a power drawing, which is gravitational intensity, and a power providing, which is a magnetical intensity capability. These are the capabilities we have and the exchange of energy that we have with respect to power. And they follow the laws of the conservation of energy. So we have to understand this balance of magnetical, gravitational relationships on each and every level, and then in between the various levels. So energy has a portability. So in summary, we call it an energy state transition. Either it's elevation, which is a physical matter state to an energy state, or it's inertia, which is an energy state to a physical matter state. So when we talk about elevation, that involves expansion. And expansion means a lot of different things. So when we look at the periodic table of elements, we see that the mass increases. And so if the mass increases, that means it has more. So we start at, let's say, hydrogen, which has a mass of 1, and go up to zinc, which has a mass of 30. Clearly, there's a change in that mass, and clearly there's a change in its structure. So how do we pick and choose which one it is? So it all is based on the nuclear feeding inertia. So each energy state is a fragment of the complexity, and each one is gravitationally stable. But from that stability, we have this dimensional portability. So you can pick your 3-dimension points, and wherever you come, you have to know that there's more than 3 as your answer, because you still have the first one and the second one and the third one. You don't sacrifice anything in that process. What you are doing is setting up MAGRAPH pathways, which are based on attraction and repulsion. So we're talking about the gravitational intensity feedback and a magnetical intensity feeding. And that's what is the difference, which I'm sure you can all see the difference between the electron and the neutron. So when we're talking about science in general, we find that in the beginning, there was this undifferentiated beginning. And you don't have to be at the beginning to understand that. You just have to create a condition where we have the neutron that comes before the atom. And when you look at the mass, it doesn't balance. So the difference was the PM tick. Well, we understand that the neutron has a magnetical gravitational relationship with its field. And the atom, well, of course, we have 2 different things. We have the electron and the proton, but in combination, the electron is magnetical and the proton is gravitational. So there's a balance field. So the PM tick within itself has to have its ability to have a magnetical gravitational relationship and have a containment. And that containment can manifest as light. And we know that because we can see that in the daytime. but that light came from the darkness, and that darkness was from within. So now we have a basis for understanding how these things are moving. The PM ticks are the principal matter, and they're magnetical. They're energy packs that are moving all over the place. And what they're seeking is the convergence of the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter jet. And then it has to be someplace. So here we have the inertia field interaction of the Earth space. And so that becomes our environment. And that becomes the magrab of our existence in our physicality. And this all stems from the plasma reality. And the plasma reality is the substructure. But the plasma reality has its own structure. And that structure is different from another converging plasma reality. So the two create a gradient. And at that point, you have an inertia field. And that creates that dimension point. And then it can grow by having many points, just like the GANS does at the core. And so there's always this magnetical gravitational relationship, which is the existence, is the point of existence. Without that gravitational confirmation, it really doesn't exist. So when we look at hydrogen, even though we can't see it, you can't grab it or anything, it does emit an emission spectrum of light that is a fingerprint of its existence. So this is a way to detect the coming from the plasma into the physicality, because we let there be light, and that's so we can see that. And we know the same is true at night, because things that are animate are constantly emitting, and we can see that. So it's just like your aura, and you can pick your color, but our awareness is every color. The aura is just some specific color at that certain specific time. And our physical interpretation is really of no color. It is of the existence of the animate carbon structure. So this is what happens under our Epitome. We have this manifestation of life. And so the relationship between the manifestation of life and its existence is peace. And now we understand why the gravitational confirmation on this planet is so important. We're talking about crossing the threshold from that emission of light to oxygen, which is a non-visible gas, but it too has a fingerprint in its emission spectrum. But fundamentally, it is gravitational, and life on this planet is important, has an important connection to oxygen. So we find that in the GANS structure, the oxygen is a fundamental component, but not in every GANS. So most of the GANSs have an oxygen component to it. And we find that that is fundamental to all the seeds, because from there things grow, and they require the energy to grow. And that energy is in the hydrogen. So the hydrogen in motion is the energy the seeds need to go from that seed structure to that GANS explosion and go through the various dimensions. So the dimensional star formation is magnetical, and it always has this dimensional point of view, which is this Magrav singularity. So it's either the soul point of view or the soul of physicality point of view, and then it hits that threshold of awareness where it has to become a physical interpretation. And then from there, we have this collective point of awareness. So every point of view becomes an awareness point of view. And in that regard, it becomes highly gravitational. So there you have the construct. And so the Epitome reactor is fundamental for that because it gives you this shielding, which is a dimension point, and it gives this star positioning, which is another dimension point. And then we have the possession, which is the physical manifestation, another dimension point. So all of these coexist. So we like to say that the direction of flow is continuous, and it is based, its strength is based on the gradient. However, in order to understand this flow a lot better, you can't just connect one to another. You have to look at the polarity, the emission, and the absorption. But that's not enough either. The key check is when you disconnect. What happens then? Do you disrupt the whole thing? Well, no, of course not. You can undermine its efficiency. You can downplay its vitality, but there is always a contiguous connection because energy is always flowing and you can't stop it. So when we look at, let's say, cancer in the body, there's some kind of communication that gives you this unseen stability that comes from the brain to the body via the heart. And then there's a communication intracellular, and it too is stable. So the cancer is just a disruption of that stability, but it doesn't disrupt the whole system. It still maintains its communication. So when we're talking about the direction of flow, there is no predetermination that we're going to choose the kidney over the nose or the legs over the liver. The direction of flow is constant. It applies everywhere because every cell is constantly growing, constantly regenerating, constantly repairing, and so that direction of flow is universal. And so it's all done contiguously. If there's a disruption in one, it doesn't disrupt the other. So it all is a balance between the feeding and the feedback. So we have this limitation of our inner space, but there's no limitation with the outer space. So we have this universal contiguous connection, and it allows us to know by connection because we can't know everything, not in the present state. We need some kind of artificial awareness assistance. And this will give us that what's missing is that generational point of view. So we can get that with a rapid generational learning system that just relies on the rapid historic generational learning. So that's by going to the library and reading all the books in short order. However, we need to cross that threshold of the transgenerational awareness, the teachings of the Creator. And that is a much bigger book. So we need some supplementation because we are consumers. So we also need supplementation because we have acquired some knowledge, but that is conditional teaching by ancient teachers. What we need to get is that unconditional teaching by the Creator. That is also contributing to our 20% deficiency. So there's a new awareness that is coming, and that is allowing us to cross that historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting, which we become so dependent on. It's our cross to carry. As we've seen in the 604th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, we have the demarcation of the soul of physicality, and the physicality, and how we cross from one side to the other. So one way we depend on the soul of physicality to do all the work, yet the connection between the soul and the physicality remains in place. So Epitome does affect the spiritual. There's a spiritual epitome. This is the highest form of love and is generally considered to be agape. This is a Greek term that describes selfless, unconditional love that is given freely without expectation of return. This love is defined not by emotion, but by the will and the steady intention to act for another's highest good. While other forms of love are also significant, agape is distinct because it is sacrificial, extends to all people, and is the love exemplified by God in many religious contexts. So, it's a good story, isn't it? And that's why we have so many religions and why they are so important. But we don't have peace on this planet, so something is missing. Maybe it's our understanding of the word sacrificial. So this term agape is a Greek word, which is a word for a form of love characterized by selfless sacrifice, unconditional commitment to the well-being of others, regardless of circumstance or merit. It represents the highest form of love, often used in Christianity to describe God's love for humanity and the reciprocal human love for God and fellow people. Unlike other forms of love like eros or philia, agape is not primarily a feeling, but a conscious action and choice to seek the good of others, embodying an ecosystem of other-focused love. So, in direct opposition to narcissism, isn't it? So when we look at the agape ideal, many philosophers and religious figures throughout history have emphasized agape as an ideal for human relationships, embodying kindness, novel concept, and a commitment to others' well-being, without exception, another novel concept. So the agape itself goes to various stages of love. So we understand eros as the erotic, passionate love, or philia, the love of friends and equals. Storge, the love of parents for children. Agape is the love of mankind. That is the primary reference there. So when we look at the 609th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, when we start to encounter the possibility of engaging with others in the universe, we find on the left-hand side a distinct separation of the soul from the physicality. And although it's hard to see in the picture, I've emphasized the crosshairs. And as we see, there's a migration to move from the physicality to the soul area. So we can better see that the key point here is that we are seeing the fingerprints of the amino acid of life. That is the shocking aspect of it. And as such, it creates a very, very strong attraction. So not only do we have the physicality moving with the soul of physicality, but it's moving into the domain of the soul. And although it's hard to see in this picture, because it's a picture, not a motion picture, there is a movement towards the soul. So we have this mutual attraction, which means that it is peaceful. So we like to have many inertia GANS shielding points to shield ourselves from hostiles, from aggression, from environmental harm, from fear-mongering, from emotional abuse. But this is in contrary to what we've just seen, where the attraction is so strong that it comes together on the soul side, which is the epitome. And we know that this is an important epitome because we have already a proof of concept. You and I have a preference and a sentimentality to be born from radiance. And we were using the outer space system. And we were born into the inner space of the earth space. And our manifestation in the inner space of man space. And so that combination was simply irresistible. The attraction was very, very strong. And we are not alone. We had excitable visitors. They had a reverse dreamscape. And the question we had is, which reality dimension did they come from? And are they racists, wolves, sheep, or Trojans and horses? Well, the vacuum condition we said facilitates the initiator. And who is the plasma initiator or the plasma receiver? Because you see, the simply irresistible energy of love is a two-way carbon connection. That's what we've been trying to discuss, to understand transmutation better. It's an emotional connection. It responds to a 17-gap cycle. It reflects the energy embodiment and the energy transition. And that transition is the epitome of love and manifests in the embodiment of love, the agape of love. So the epitome of love is when you're looking at humans, they may transport on Earth space, or they may transmute in outer space. But that epitome of love is the connection of the emotion of love. And that connection is not an element. It is an energy pack. So love is not an emotion. Love is energy in motion, and it is simply irresistible. So when we're looking at this dynamic soul initiator, we're looking at the soul of the creator. There's a soul of the earth, soul of the family of humanity, soul of the man, soul of the body, and then we know the soul of the cells. This is the epitome of life. It's impeccable. So here we are in uncharted territories, and there are many stars beyond what we're looking at, the nanomonatomic state. So we cover the full range from the decay to the radiation. And we are that ancestral intelligence. We are the technology. We are the inertia product of all of that. And we are in the image of our dimensional convergence point. It all stems from the soul food. This is why we have to tune in, to plug into the creator, turn on that energy and drop out of our resistance so that we can receive that inertia point and we become that inertia point. But we have to provide a pattern so that we can get that energy. So for 609 Knowledge Seekers workshops in a row, every Thursday, bringing together the greater oneness to suddenly transcend the limitations of nuclear science. And we are not alone. We have developed a technology to convert diamonds to gold, and we can extend that. We're just at the beginning of that curve. So we're calling out all the Kesh Space Plasma research teams. Let's get this technology release going because our beds are burning and it's hard to sleep. We need a rescue on the scientific, financial, and political side. It's all part of the preservation rescue. We are consumers, and so we need a consumption rescue. back to the creation rescue. So we are practicing on the transmutation test, and coming up in October, there will be another, and you can continue with that. We are all students of this transmutation. We're not fallen. We are arrived. We arrived with the creation of matter. We arrived with the facility of the light, and we're all part of the origin of the universe, and we are creators creating. Our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to the lack of knowledge. So yeah, there's a world peace treaty. So please help us achieve this goal. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the new knowledge seekers and the beautiful knowledge seekers of the Carbon Nation, learning about the new selection process of the new organic plasma science. There's the World Peace Treaty, so choose it, sign it unconditionally, mean it sincerely. So the point of the true GANS tech is to cross these polyatomic boundaries. The peace dome of outer space can be your guiding beacon. Is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? Or is it time to learn the history of self in a universal context? The GANS is a peaceful superconductor of true intentions. And we mean truthful intentions, because the GANS tech and energy flows are the epitome of love, of life, as it manifests. Plasma science is delivered daily by the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. I hope you enjoyed this session. That's the end of the lesson, and thank you all for listening.
And I have a question. This is I have been thinking a lot about this unconditional, about the giving thing. About Mr. Kesh was talking about giving to a certain degree of giving what we have left over. But what is this unconditional sacrificial thing about? That seems to contradict that.
Well, exactly, and I think you've hit a key point here, because the sacrificing aspect of it is not at your demise. As I've often spoken about the third richest man in France dying with $14 billion in the bank. I'm sure he could sacrifice a few shekels there, because we still have hardship and hunger in that country. But I'm just picking on one country.
Yeah. Could someone maybe look up the definition of sacrifice and the meaning of that, and we could relate it to giving or to not whatever? Because sacrifice to me seems like cutting into the own flesh.
Yeah, and then as I say, I think that's what they've led us to believe. That's what it's noble to sacrifice, and someone is telling you to do that, right? And it's better that you do that than I do that. Like, this is why world leaders send soldiers to war. It's better that you go and fight my battle than I go fight my battle. Because not only would you sacrifice your life, if you will, for my decision, but it's self-preservation. So rules for some and not for others, and this is the problem. We don't need to do that. We don't need to sacrifice anything. The sacrifice is really to understand that we don't need to be greedy. So without pulling on that definition in hard terms, greed and is in many ways is the opposite to sacrificing, because the greed is just grabbing, from everywhere, and it's just gimme, gimme, gimme. And it's reinforced by the fear to sacrifice anything, and the thing that bothers me about the sacrifice is that it is not always, it has a possibility of being misplaced. In other words, when you're given the capability of doing something, there's a responsibility that goes along with that. And that responsibility is actually a reward. It's not a burden. It allows you to be more and do more. And when you're in that position, that's not a sacrifice. That is a transformation of one energy state to another energy state.
So maybe agape is not sacrificial love in the definition of sacrifice as hurting oneself.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the whole point. The reason I brought it up is because this is what we're faced with. You start to go down that path and you say, well, I don't really understand the meaning of words. So let's look it up. And you say, oh, it's unconditional love is a sacrifice. Really? Does that mean you have to crash and burn because your marriage is not working, let's say, whereas the one is abusing constantly? And so we find that abuse becomes fundamental to most of the problems we have in relationships. And, marriage was just one example, but business is the same way, or institutions, they all have their binding fields, but are those binding fields a form of abuse? So when you see how do you grow, and in this earth we are only getting 80%. Well, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but why are we being shortchanged? So that 20% is that sacrifice. We're not sacrificing 100%. The only time that we're sacrificing 100% is when we are all in to save that 20%. Would you sacrifice 100% to save that 20%? That really doesn't make any sense at all.
So for me, it would be beneficial to drop that word.
Can you repeat that, please?
For me, it would be useful to drop that word.
I agree.
Sacrifice.
I agree. Because it has developed a horrific connotation.
Yeah, right. Like in the Bible, when whoever was putting his child on the altar to get burned for the benefit or the glory of God.
Yeah, how's that working out?
That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, well, we laugh at it because that's how stupid that concept is. And yet, so many believe in its necessity.
Right, and as Mr. Kesh said, he takes what he needs. The rest is to share with the others, but he never believed in taking all your clothes off and giving them to the poor and living that kind of life. You take what you need to live a comfortable life, whatever that is to you, and the rest is to share with the others.
That's what I understand, and that sort of straightened me out a bit, because I tend to go all the way.
Well, this is why the plasma science is the epitome of life, because it follows the rules of the creator, not the man-made rules of our current environment.
Mhm. And the distinction, like Mr. Kesh made a distinction between greed and what the squirrels do, they prepare for the next cold season. And that is not from greed, not the way he defines it. Even though for us it kind of looks like it. I'm trying to find the distinction.
And again, he stressed the point of you decide what's truth to you. Nobody tells you what the truth is.
Mhm.
I mean, somebody else's heaven could be my hell. This is how I understand it. Or
Yeah, I'm just trying to be real honest with myself and examine that phenomenon of greed.
we all seem to have it, knowledge seekers and the rest of humanity. This is part of the process that's happening to satisfy that emotion of greed, which causes a lot of conflicts on the local level, on the family level, at the work level, and at the international political level. This greed to possess. Are you satisfied?
Well, I would love to have lots of money. Then I'd have more to give away.
The wealth is within us, not belonging to us. We all sort of make that mistake. Before Selena leaves, I wanted to bring up the idea of the hologram. Again, are we hologram generators? In a way, the results seem to be the same, but a hologram may be a little different. And I just thought I'd share the screen, Alex, for a moment.
Go ahead.
And let's just see if we can share something here. I know they're talking in the Beijing Olympics how they use this holographic light show. Here is a 7D hologram projector. Again, Mr. Kesh said at one point, or maybe it was you, Alex, or somebody, in other words, if I think I see a UFO, did I really see it, or did I create that in my mind and the eyes saw what I was believing in? Let's just see how good these holograms are today, if we can. Hopefully we don't have a commercial.
Wow, that is beautiful.
Isn't it? And there's another one that was very interesting too. Of course, they showed this at the Olympics. Here's one in Dubai. Okay. I just thought I'd show them. So, when you have a dream about a rose and you actually are smelling the rose, you're seeing the rose, is that a hologram or is that an interaction of gravitational magnetic plasmatic fields? And this is the difference. Alex, would you like to share your understanding of a hologram? And it is the same result. You're still seeing the picture, but the way it's created is not through projectors, it's through interaction of fields. Just to add to Selena's sharing about the hologram.
The holograms you just demonstrated were actually projectors. And you can do that, you can do that on your cell phone or your tablet. You can actually create a hologram that way. So that's something that is normal. And that's the difference between that is light that is diverging and light that is in parallel lines like a laser. But as far as a mental construct,
Our dream, let's say, or the
yeah,
soul.
that's right.
Yeah.
So, you can envision yourself in another city. So, let's say you were to envision yourself in New York City, and you could probably envision a location in New York City. And so really you're there. You're already there, mentally there. So the mind is the builder. And so do you have to follow in its physicality? Well, if we follow by the car, there will be a delayed reaction. So our transport, let's say from, your location to New York City, so the first thing would involve a plan. Then you would have to, figure out which day you will be going, and then the ways and means will you go by plane? Will you go by car? Will you walk? And so all of these decisions have to be made in advance. And then you actually go through the process of going. Now, when you compare all of that preparation to that image that you did mentally, that image was created within a split second. And yet to actually physically follow up is, as we keep talking about the donkey transmission. Well, the difference is that we can step up now into the transmutation. We have that technology. In fact, we've always had that technology. The problem, of course, is that it liberates humanity, and that is not in everybody's best interest. So I would say that it's in humanity's best interest.
So we keep a lid on that, don't we? I mean, the structure.
Yeah, well, I had a rude awakening. I seen my first drawing of a UFO, in 1975, and it was explained to me how it worked, and it works exactly the way the plasma science has explained it. And so that was 1975, and here we are in 2025. And so, yeah, well, what are we saying? The reference on the 609th Knowledge Seekers Workshop was that the UFOs are like ancient technology, that we have surpassed that with the plasma science.
Would you like to take the screen back, please, Alex? And
Oh,
Celine,
yep.
would you like to comment on this hologram again? If you'd like.
You were talking to me,
Yes.
Mark?
Would you like to comment on that again?
Yeah. I say hologram this way. There is a layer. I told you there is a layer, few layer. So hologram, if you say simply this way, I don't have those much um, um, understanding about the hologram, but I'm saying it's feel like hologram. It's like it is not only hologram. There is a layer. The first you think it is hologram, and if you go deeper, you understand there is more gravitational magnetic field. I have a lot of experience, like some dream or vision or something. If I go there, I don't only see the thing. I feel thing. I get emotion, and I get energy. Sometimes if I go to like very stressful places, like saving something or doing something, like what kinds of situation, when I come back, I feel very tired. I don't have any energy. I'm sweating. It feel like I was there. I did thing really. So I'm looking thing. I'm experiencing thing. I'm bringing the experience with me. So that is the thing. I don't know what you call that.
And Alex, a hologram you cannot physically touch, can you? If the one we saw with the dragon and so, or the fish there, I couldn't really touch it. My finger would probably go right through it, right? Because it's a projection.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know that because you know, when you were watching a movie projection in school, you were always making these funny hand gestures on and creating shadows, right?
And in the dream, we can't always touch it, even though we think we're touching it. This is just a creation of plasmatic magnetic gravitational fields interacting, or two souls interacting, perhaps. And as he said, you dream of the mother, but it's an interaction of energy. But for you to see it in a dream, the soul has to allow it to go back and back filter through the brain, that you would understand what what the soul is interacting with.
So
Otherwise, it's an
the
energy.
hologram, in fact, becomes an epitome. And the thing about the GANS is that it too is an epitome. So there is a truthfulness. What you're transmitting is going to manifest in that image. And that is going to be truthful. So that the thing is that we are dominant on what you see is what you get. But you know, you have to look at the projector. The projector is the one who is determining what you're going to see. So if you were to change the projector, you would see something different. Now, in the case of, you know, you as a spectator looking at a hologram, well, that's all fine and dandy. But you know, when you start to look at everything that's going on in the universe, and you say, hey, wait a second, I'm the observer, right? And I'm watching what's coming together. But in that process, there is something that is being emitted. And so we see how maybe book number 3 should be book number 1, and book number 1 should be book number 3. But not really. It's a two-way street. So we, as the observer, see that information, and then we add to it. We are part of it, and our interpretation of what we observe is impactful. So therefore, we become the creators. And since we are not part of the fallen dimensions, we are part of the arrived dimensions. We have arrived. We didn't just drop out like, you know, out of a wet paper bag and, you know, you just kind of fall out and say, oops. This was conceived. This was planned. We are the
Yes.
manifestation of that intention, and we are the epitome of that. Go ahead, Selena.
Thank you, Alex. There is a song in Bangla, the Sufi people and those kinds of people sing. That is, I'm going to explain. They say the creator created the body and hide inside the body. After creating the body, the creator hide inside the body. And that is the thing is happening. We are the creator. We are the creating the body, and we are the creator hiding inside the body. That is the main point, and we are experiencing from that light, that's all, that consciousness.
Yes, I remember Mr. Kesh saying our soul is built on top of and above the soul of the creator.
And whatever way you explain the thing is one thing we can explain different way, but that the thing is oneness.
I'm glad I didn't correct you, Alex. I thought that was epitome, but it's epitome. I was going to say, isn't that the word epitome? Maybe there's not even such a word, but it's the epitome. Okay. Anyone else want to ask a question? Thank you, Dennis. He's leaving. No problem.
Mark, I would just like to emphasize the fact that, when we're talking about the epitome of life, and, I constantly refer to the commandment, thou shalt not lie. You cannot lie to the epitome of life because that is an example of the true life. And so the truthfulness is essential in that. And that is really the epitome of life, and the plasma science reflects that. And that is one of the reasons we have all this resistance, is because that truthfulness is exposing a lot of people to our, let's just simplify it and call it our greed. And that has been the motivation of everything that we're doing. So I want to thank everybody for allowing me to present, and then I want to thank you all for contributing in the way you have, because you are certainly clarifying the situation and clarifying the terminology, and in directly you are showing how important it is to be precise in our language. And when we look at the next generation of students that are coming out of school, they are very imprecise in their words, and they don't think it matters. Well, it does, because those words change in context. And this is one of the problems that we've had in our society, that truthfulness then gets hidden. And the GANS and the plasma goes right through that, sees right through it. So that's why I was so eager to bring up this subject. And thank you all for allowing me to present. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you for learning us how to walk a little bit better. That's broken English. Do you want to mention anything about these Pico materials? Mr. Kesh said that's the next sort of direction the Kesh Foundation is going into. And as we've heard in the past, the foundation is the only entity on this planet that's consistently and regularly creating Pico materials, and probably below. But what does this mean to the computer world? Does this mean I'm going to have a tiny little computer I can hardly see, or what sort of ramifications, if anyone's in that sort of structure? What does this mean to the world of computers? Just faster and smaller, or is there more to it, perhaps?
Well, as you can see by the Pico picture, Pico isn't just smaller. The entire Pico coating is sitting in the gap of the nano coating. The nano coating is monatomic. But when you look at the Pico coating, it has many, many points, like the GANS. Each point is therefore an energy point. And when you have a multitude of energy points gathering together, so you have an increase in charge, not just based on surface to volume ratio, which is 3 orders of magnitude, but you also have how shall we say, a gang effect here. Each point, then you have to remember that the whole thing that you're looking at in terms of a structure is a Pico coating. And the Pico coating itself is made up of many, many points. I would hazard to count them all.
was gonna say, could this have 1 billion or 1 trillion points on it, and each one is like a computer connection or something, or could be used in that realm?
Each one is a path link. Each one has a maggrav gradient charge on it. So the maggrav is a magnetical gravitational relationship, and the gradient charge imparts the direction of flow. And that can be controlled.
As he said, we can put the entire knowledge of humanity on something that's quite small, a few centimeter cube, with this sort of.
Well, remember that Richard Feynman, who was a scientist with NASA, he actually calculated that you could put the entire energy of the universe inside a thimble. And a thimble is that thing that people who do sewing put on their fingers so they don't prick their fingers. I would need 5 thimbles on my hand to do that, but
Right.
when you
Well, that sounds correct. If you can have 1,000 angels dance on the head of a pin, I imagine the whole knowledge of the universe could be contained in a thimble, but I kind of doubt that. I think, as you say, we need a few thimbles for that.
well, I'm just saying that this is, from one of the preeminent scientists in the world, stated this conclusion, and it is a fact. So you don't need when people think of ramping up in terms of technology, it's not like a car, van, pickup truck, uh, transport truck. You say, well, I'm going to ramp up to something that I can do transportation with. That's not the limitation is the speed limit on the highway. So if it's going to take you 1 hour to deliver that product, obviously, if you have a bigger vehicle, you can deliver more in that same time frame. But if you have unlimited speed, then you don't need to have a bigger truck. You just need to have more cars, if you will. And we don't even need the cars. Now we have the energy is transported. So if the energy can move, and the energy always is moving, and we know that the energy can actually manifest into physicality. So by extension, we know that we can manifest something using, shall we say, a holographic generator, and not just create the image, but let's go one step further. Let's create the physicality from that image. Okay, how about that? And we can do that. We already do that with 3D printers, right? So that electrical current that's in the program, that electrical current that's in the technology that is controlling the printer is already there. It's in a language of energy transition. It's the printer itself that transitions it into physicality, isn't it? So basically, we've already done that with 3D printers. That's in the physicality. The electrical signal that goes to the computer is physical. The manifestation of that physical thing is in the physicality. Why would we not be able to go into the plasma reality? So we realize now how the spaceships are created. You create that image, and then you create the coding, and then you rain it on the image, and it will reside at the boundary where the image meets the physicality. And that's how you create that spaceship.
So the pico material, is this a matter state, would you say, or is this an energy state?
It's 100% matter state because then you see the picture.
Okay. I didn't know if that was an artist rendition or.
No, it's actually a picture of the pico matter. This was a technological breakthrough in of itself.
Okay.
Because remember that a microscope is 10 to the power of 3, nanos being 10 to the 6th, and pico 10 to the minus 9th. So it's 6 orders of magnitude greater than that of a microscope. And then what do they qualify with an electron microscope, right? So it's actually a microscope that is seeing with a electron image. And what about ultrasound? I mean, think about that. Can you see sound? You know, if I play the piano, can you see the notes coming out of the piano? No. And yet you can take sound and see an image within the, you know, what they use ultrasound is to see, say a baby in a placenta. So, you know, we aren't too amazed by that, are we? And we're not too amazed by the fact that we could touch a screen on a cell phone and actually create something, you know, we could call someone or we could text someone. So clearly there is energy that is being emitted out of that finger. And this is the thing that if we understand that technology, we shouldn't be that amazed with the plasma science. What we should be is more demanding. That's where the problem lies.
Thank you, Alex. Any other questions anyone would like to ask? I'm going to conclude with the video from Beijing, but he said those reactors are embedded in some of these 3I or the R2 craft. This is how they create the materials. He said if he was creating a craft in China, he wouldn't allow that material to fall to the ground or to the floor. He said he would allow it to float, and then having a second field, that floating material would be attracted to that field, and therefore you'd get the structure of the craft. But he said though that system that we'll see in the final video is a system that they use to add materials onto their meteorite or their asteroid or on top of their craft to create that protection dimension in the matter state.
Hi, Mark.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I wanna add something. Did you finish or?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I don't know about that much technology. Not that much. Totally, I don't know about technology. But when people dream, you saw in the who are watching the scientists, they put something in their head. So when people dream, their eyelid is move and then they shake, right? So we watch those kinds of picture when we want to see. But what kinds of experience or dream they're having, we don't know yet, right? Right now, few technology is people making, so they can detect their experience, but still they can see their picture, what kinds of dreams they're having. In the future, maybe we will make those kinds of technology. If we get dream, we'll see the same picture. So there is developing step by step. There is layer, and our right now we are talking about spaceship and those kinds of experience. There is layer 2. We don't understand yet, and whoever getting those experience, they can't explain properly. Our condition is like that. Maybe in the future we'll explain part by part what is happening, what after what, and we are that situation. My understanding.
Yeah, that was
And
the idea of the transmutation, that now we can do it consciously. without closing the eyes and going to sleep. This is part of being able to do it in the conscious realm, even though, as he said, some people do go to sleep and transmute. That's the
Yeah.
way they seem to do it. But he talked about being very conscious of the transmutation, very similar to the daydream, but extending it.
And sometimes you don't have to go to sleep or go to meditation to get the experience. You can get experience in any time if you
Absolutely.
connect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, we're just, as he said, they're coming in on the donkey, but mankind hasn't even learned to walk yet. So even though the system the 3I is using is rather ancient, we haven't sort of cracked that nut yet fully. Maybe aspects of it, yes. But we certainly are being taught the transmutation, and as he said, a number of knowledge seekers have achieved that. Or part of it, or for a period of time, as I understand it. Before he said no one has achieved it yet, and when the first one achieved it, it would be passed on in a way to the other one, the way the knowledge is shared. But in this workshop, he said that some knowledge seekers have achieved, at least partially, probably, type of transmutation in the energy dimension. We haven't transited that I'm aware of, where you would manifest the physicality or release the physicality at the point of destination. This is another sort of knowledge. But again, if you can operate in that dimension of energy, you don't really need the physicality. Okay, any other thoughts or questions anyone would like to? I'm going to, again, play the video, which is 3 minutes in Beijing, about this creation of materials and how crafts are loaded up with different kinds of materials, or how you even create a craft. Apparently, it could have been shown there, but he said those systems in Beijing are part of the craft we're seeing coming in. This is how they add the materials to their structure, or probably release or shed some of that structure as they get into a clean environment where that sort of structure is not needed for protection. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm talking with my mic closed. This is the three wise men. This is the gift that the Christians all missed. This idea of the thinking, speaking, and acting good. And again, I think this is a beautiful shielding. Remember the 3 layers of the shielding, the different fields going clockwise, counterclockwise, and back to clockwise. But this thinking, speaking, and acting good is part of a shielding. And if you can develop that, I think you'll enjoy your life. And this here, what's on the keychain, will be more meaningful perhaps to you. And this was given to some of the, all the knowledge seekers that went to one of the events. And it says, may you be proud of the work you do, the person you are, and the difference you make. But these 3, this understanding, and again, we were all taught it was matter state, but it's actually an energy gift of thinking, speaking, and acting, which keeps the whole structure in balance and creates a shielding as I see it. Okay, I'm going to play the video from Beijing where Mr. Kesh showed the materials. As he said, we all missed it. We were looking for the spoons or the gold filling up the spoons, but this is the way these craft actually add material onto themselves, and I'm sure it could have been demonstrated there. And I'll play the final disclaimer after that video, and the meeting will come to an end.